Grown children abandoned elderly parents on the side of the road, but never expected what happened next. An elderly couple sees their lives change in an unexpected way after their own children make a drastic decision. What seemed like a bitter ending turns into a story filled with emotion, revelations, and twists no one could have imagined. Get ready to follow every detail of this intense narrative, where secrets come to light and the characters' destinies take a surprising turn. Subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun hadn't yet risen over Cedar Falls when Henry Whitaker got up, his bones aching and his breath short. The wooden house he had rebuilt with Evelyn decades earlier felt different, now cold, unfamiliar, filled with impatient footsteps and accusing looks. The hallway smelled of weak coffee and disinfectant, more like a boarding facility than a home. Evelyn was still asleep, curled under a thin blanket, and Henry, careful, didn't wake her. He slipped on his worn robe and headed to the kitchen, moving slowly so as not to draw attention. The morning paper sat on the table, but he didn't open it. He grabbed a mug and watched the steam rise, trying to remember when the children used to run through the house laughing. Now Richard talked about bills, Melissa about expenses, David about sacrifices, Chloe about embarrassment. All grown, all busy, all in a hurry to be rid of the man who once supported them. Henry felt the heaviness of it pressing in his chest like a stone. While stirring his coffee, he heard footsteps in the hallway. He didn't want to be seen and, without thinking, slipped into the pantry, leaving the door slightly ajar. It was where they kept canned goods and old memories. The voices started low, conspiratorial. He recognized Melissa's firm tone giving instructions. It has to look like care, Richard. The home has a good reputation. They sign the papers. Then we file for guardianship. Henry held his breath. We can't make it obvious this is about the money. Richard's voice was cold. Just stick to the story about helping them. Once we control the assets, we'll sort everything out. David, sounding unsure, asked, what if they refuse to go? Melissa answered sharply, they will. They have no choice. We just need to show we can't support them anymore. Chloe laughed softly, fiddling with her phone. And I'll finally get to use their room for myself. I've already picked the pink color. Henry's body went cold. The mug trembled in his hidden hand. They were talking about a nursing home as if it were disposal. They were talking about legal incapacity, about assets, about papers. For months, he and Evelyn had believed their children were simply tired and overwhelmed, but still motivated by some kind of concern. Right there, behind the pantry door, he heard the naked truth. There was no concern, only a plan. A plan to get rid of their parents and take everything that was left. Richard gave another order. When they arrive, everyone cries a little, says it's for their own good. It has to look like an act of love. Melissa added, the people from the home will be here next week. Once the papers are signed, in 2 months, we get the conservatorship. Henry nearly let a sound escape, but bit his lips and stayed still. When the voices moved off toward the living room, he stepped out slowly, his heart pounding erratically. He leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to catch his breath. What he had just overheard felt like a scene from a movie, but it was his life. His own children, the ones he had fed, taught to walk, taught to speak, were plotting to take him out of his own home. He ran a hand over his lined face, feeling a mix of anger, pain, and clarity. He thought of Evelyn asleep in their room, still believing the kids only wanted her best. How could he tell her without breaking her? How could he confess that the 4 of them had become strangers capable of abandoning their parents? Henry walked back to the bedroom, each step heavy. Evelyn was breathing peacefully, unaware. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his wife, remembering the promises he had once made, to protect her, to care for her, never to leave her alone. The weight of what he'd learned pulsed in his chest like a warning. At that moment, he decided he couldn't let her be blindsided by the betrayal. He squeezed her hand gently, a gesture Evelyn, half asleep, returned without understanding. He stared at the ceiling and thought about everything they had. The house, a small amount of savings, old letters tucked away in drawers. What might seem trivial to the children was, to them, the entire story of their lives. In the kitchen, cutlery clinked and voices resumed in a normal tone, pretending routine. But Henry no longer heard it the same way. Every casual phrase now sounded like a mask for something darker. He knew that when the conversation about opportunity came for real, it wouldn't be a surprise. It was already a sentence, planned and sealed. And within him, alongside the fear, a quiet determination was taking shape. He had to come up with a plan before it was too late. He had to protect Evelyn. He had to stop the children, posing as caregivers, from stripping them not just of their assets, but of their dignity. As his coffee went cold, Henry understood this was only the first day of a much bigger fight. The next morning began with doors slamming and hurried footsteps. Richard walked into the kitchen with a leather briefcase in hand, Melissa right behind him, scrolling on her phone with a determined look. David tried to seem neutral, but his eyes betrayed his anxiety, and Chloe wore a smile that didn't match the moment. Henry sat at the table stirring his coffee without drinking it while Evelyn placed toast on a plate. The atmosphere was heavy, no greetings, no small talk. The smell of warm bread mixed with the weak coffee, creating a forced, uncomfortable scene. Richard cleared his throat, straightened his tie, and announced they had something important to discuss. Melissa crossed her arms, taking charge with a calculated gaze. Evelyn froze mid-motion, the butter knife suspended in the air, waiting for what would come next. Henry stayed still, his fingers gripping the mug to keep from trembling. Melissa began her speech with a voice far too sweet to be genuine. She spoke of concern, sleepless nights, and how they had been trying to find a solution for everyone. Richard chimed in, gesturing like an executive pitching to a difficult client. There was a place called Sunset Pines Retirement Home, a facility for seniors with medical care, activities, and companionship. Chloe cut in, saying it would be good for them to meet new people. David added that they would have round-the-clock care and meals prepared by nutritionists. Evelyn blinked several times, struggling to process what she was hearing. Henry said nothing, keeping his eyes fixed on his children's faces, taking in every detail of the performance. They spoke of care, but Henry knew from what he'd overheard in the pantry that this was about abandonment and taking their assets, even if it was just the house and a modest savings. Evelyn tried to object. "This is our home. We built it ourselves. Every corner has a story." Melissa replied quickly, like someone who had rehearsed. "Mom, it's not a goodbye. It's a change for your own good." Richard reinforced the conciliatory tone. "You deserve comfort. And we need to get our own lives organized too." Chloe tapped at her phone, smiling at something unrelated to the conversation. David kept his eyes on his plate, avoiding his parents' gaze. Henry drew a deep breath and asked only, "When did you decide this?" Melissa exchanged a quick look with Richard and said they had already visited the place, that everything was ready to receive them. Evelyn turned to Henry for support, but saw only a controlled expression. He didn't want to reveal that he already knew. He feared that might trigger something worse. The rest of the morning dragged on in automatic gestures. Evelyn put utensils back in the cupboard. Henry rolled up the newspaper without reading it. The children spoke of dates, times, and transport. Chloe commented about how the empty room could become her office. Melissa showed pictures on her phone of Sunset Pines, with green lawns and smiling seniors in rocking chairs. Richard explained the contract as if it were nothing special, just a form to make medical visits easier. David added that it was an opportunity for everyone to breathe easier. Evelyn listened, but the words cut through her like a cold wind. Henry stayed silent, his hand clenched on his knee to contain his anger. By the afternoon, the children returned with a stack of papers to sign. Melissa placed the contract on the table with a pen on top. "It's just a formality, Mom, Dad," she said firmly. Richard spoke about the need to settle things quickly before expenses increased. Chloe was taking pictures of the yard, already imagining changes. David stayed in the background, his face caught between guilt and obedience. Evelyn picked up the pen, but her hand trembled so badly she dropped it. Henry picked it up from the floor, ran his fingers along the barrel, and slowly handed it back, looking at each child as if memorizing their faces. "We'll think about it," he said calmly. Melissa frowned. "Don't take too long. The center has an opening now." The day ended with Henry and Evelyn sitting side by side on the couch, looking around the room where they had raised their children, now filled with a sense of distance. The clock marked slow hours. The conversation about the retirement home had happened, but not as a proposal. It sounded like a decision already made. Evelyn rested her head on Henry's shoulder, trying to draw strength. He wrapped his arm around her, his gesture steady despite his racing heart. He knew their children's performance wasn't about concern, it was strategy. And while Evelyn dozed off, exhausted, Henry stared at the ceiling, quietly planning how to protect his wife and the life they built from the scheme closing in on them. The transport arranged by the children arrived on a gray Tuesday. A white minibus with a discreet logo parked in front of the house, and two uniformed attendants stepped out, smiling with professional politeness. Richard showed up right after, barking orders about luggage and paperwork. Melissa was on the phone, confirming schedules and signatures. David stood with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the ground, while Chloe recorded a quick video of the facade before slipping into her own car. Henry and Evelyn stood ready with one small suitcase each, clothes folded in silence. None of the children offered to carry a thing. "It's for your own good," Richard repeated as he nudged his parents toward the vehicle. Evelyn climbed the steps slowly, her heart beating unevenly. Henry followed, feeling his knees weaken as he held tightly to the handrail so he wouldn't fall. From his seat, he looked out the window at the garden he had tended for so many years, trying to imprint every detail in his memory. The ride to Sunset Pines, retirement home, took less than half an hour but felt like an eternity. Evelyn clutched a handkerchief in her hands, her eyes glistening. Henry kept his face impassive, but inside he replayed every word he had overheard in the pantry. The attendants talked about meal schedules, recreational activities, medical appointments. Not one of them asked if the couple wanted to be there. When they stepped off, they saw a low beige building surrounded by patchy grass and a few spindly trees. A sign in green letters read, "Welcome to your new home." The smell of disinfectant drifted from the lobby. Pictures of smiling seniors lined the walls, but the narrow hallways held parked wheelchairs and tired faces. A chill ran up Evelyn's arms. Henry steadied her, hiding the pain in his chest. They were led to a shared dormitory with 8 metal beds, thin mattresses, and warm curtains. Each bed had a small drawer for personal items. "This will be your space," announced the nurse with a rehearsed tone. Evelyn set her suitcase on the mattress, looking around without saying a word. Henry remained standing, studying the exits, the routines, the staff's posture. Their children accompanied them only as far as the door, their expressions a show of false concern. Richard gave his father a pat on the shoulder. "Settle in and call us if you need anything." Melissa gave her mother a quick peck on the cheek. David muttered something unintelligible. Chloe waved from a distance, already scrolling on her phone. In less than 2 minutes, they were gone. The sound of the minibus pulling away echoed down the hall and disappeared. Dinner was served at 5 p.m., thin soup and white bread. Evelyn took a few spoonfuls in silence. glancing at the elderly woman beside her who was quietly crying. Henry pushed his bread around the plate without appetite. Low conversations floated about children who promised visits but never came. A nurse shouted orders to another group of residents at the far end of the dining room. The air smelled of urine mixed with disinfectant. The couple exchanged brief looks, each trying not to worry the other. Back in the dormitory, Evelyn sat on her bed and dropped her handkerchief on the floor. Henry bent to pick it up, his hands trembling not just from age, but from the weight of the decision forming inside him. When the clock struck 2 a.m., Henry turned toward Evelyn and saw she was awake too. He reached out, touching her hand, a quick touch, but full of meaning. "Are you okay?" he whispered. "I can't sleep," she answered, her eyes glinting in the weak hallway light. "Me neither," he said. They stayed like that for a while, hands joined. Evelyn thought about their 2 grandchildren, Richard's children, living with their mother in another state. It had already been months since they'd seen them, and now, in this place, she felt the contact would become even rarer. Henry took a deep breath. "I don't want to stay here. We don't deserve this." Evelyn didn't respond. She only squeezed his hand back. In that simple gesture, Henry felt she was thinking the same thing. Without making promises, without speaking of plans, they both understood they would have to find a way out. The shared dorm smelled of reheated food, and the distant voices of other residents came like a constant murmur. Henry stared at the peeling ceiling, remembering their house, the garden, the morning coffee, feeling that their whole life was crumbling in a place where they were treated as temporary guests in a warehouse. The thought of the grandchildren sharpened the pain. If it had been hard to see them before, now it would be nearly impossible. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, and Henry gripped her hand even tighter, determined not to let this be the last image of their story. The next morning began before the retirement home's alarm ever sounded. Henry was already sitting on the edge of the thin mattress, their small suitcase at his feet, watching Evelyn carefully fold a blouse and slip it into the clear plastic bag they had been given at admission. For days he had watched the nurses' schedules, the routes down the corridor, the keys hanging on the wall near the service exit. Everything was repetitive. Early bath, weak coffee at 6, activities at 8, lunch at 11:30, dinner at 5, medication at 8. Within that mechanical rhythm, Henry had started charting an escape route in his head. There were no maps and no promises, only the will to leave with Evelyn before the children, filed for guardianship, and locked every door. At 2 a.m., when the hallway was empty and the night guard sat with the newspaper covering his face, Henry got up, helped Evelyn with her coat, and together they walked slowly down the corridor. Dim lights glowed above the exit signs. The back door gave way with a firm push. The cold night air struck their faces, a warning that they were out but not yet safe. They walked down the side street of Sunset Pines for nearly an hour, every step measured so as not to draw attention. Evelyn carried the plastic bag with their documents and a handkerchief. Henry kept his arm around her, both to steady her and to mask his own weakness. His chest hurt, but his mind was clear. The town slept. Streetlights cast circles of yellow on empty sidewalks. They knew they had nowhere to go. The house was in their children's hands. Old friends had moved away. Neighbors had no idea what was happening. Even so, they kept moving, crossing streets, turning corners, until the first cars began to pass. Sweat ran down Henry's back, despite the cold. Evelyn pressed her lips together to keep from crying. Neither spoke, but each step was an unspoken sentence. We won't stay there. We won't be discarded. The sun was just rising when they reached the narrow highway on the edge of town. The asphalt reflected a harsh glare that burned their eyes. The night chill had already lifted, and heat rose from the ground like a heavy breath. Evelyn clutched the plastic bag to her chest, her fingers marked from the strain of walking. Henry walked beside her, breathing in short bursts, his left arm tight against his body to contain the stabbing pains in his chest. Neither of them had slept, but their exhaustion went beyond lack of rest. It was the fatigue of being torn from their own home. Cars, trucks, and buses passed without a glance. Their plain clothes, worn shoes, and lowered heads made them invisible against the landscape. Henry tried not to show weakness, but Evelyn could feel his weight leaning more heavily on her arm. They went a few more yards before finding a patch of dry grass at the roadside, a makeshift refuge in the absence of any shelter. Henry suddenly stopped, bent forward, and braced his hands on his knees, trying to pull in air that wouldn't come. Evelyn turned quickly and saw his face pale and slick with sweat. "Henry, sit down," she said urgently, but no words came from him. His eyes lost focus and his body collapsed as if a switch had been flipped. Evelyn caught him by the shoulders, kneeling on the hard ground. She called his name but heard only the distant hum of engines passing. Her hand on his chest felt a weak, irregular heartbeat fading with each second. Her arms trembling, she looked around, waving desperately at passing cars. An old white sedan appeared from the opposite direction and slowed as the driver saw Evelyn's frantic gestures. The car pulled onto the shoulder, raising a cloud of fine dust. A young man jumped down and ran toward them. He wore a simple work shirt, and his eyes shone with genuine concern. "What happened?" he asked, already kneeling beside Henry. "He collapsed. He has a heart condition," Evelyn managed between sobs. The man felt for Henry's pulse and gave a quick nod to himself. "Let's get him into the car. I'll take you to the hospital." His voice was calm, but his movement sure. He slipped an arm under Henry's shoulders, while Evelyn lifted his legs. Together, they managed to place the older man on the back seat, resting his head on a rolled-up jacket. Evelyn climbed in from the other side, gripping her husband's hand as if she could draw him back to consciousness. The car smelled of fresh bread and grease, someone coming straight from work. The young man closed the door, ran to the driver's side, and started the engine. The sound of the tires on asphalt felt to Evelyn like a thread of hope. He watched them in the rearview mirror as he drove. "Take a deep breath, sir. We'll get there quickly," he said in a steady tone. Evelyn stroked Henry's face, calling his name. He opened his eyes for an instant, a lost and weary look, before closing them again. His chest rose and fell with effort, but life was still there. Evelyn pressed her forehead to his hand and murmured words only he could hear, fighting back panic. As the car picked up speed on the highway, Evelyn tried to stay composed. "How did you end up out here?" the young man asked without taking his eyes off the road. Evelyn looked out the window, watching the blurred scenery, and didn't answer. It wasn't the time to explain they had been placed in a home like unwanted burdens or that they had escaped. "It's a long story," she murmured. "You don't have to tell me now," he said firmly, without judgment. "What matters is getting to the hospital." Evelyn gripped Henry's hand harder, feeling it cold and damp. As if through touch, she could give him the strength she had left. The car kept moving forward, swerving around potholes, accelerating where it could, carrying with it two people who had lost everything but not yet their hope. The old white sedan roared through the last blocks before the hospital. Evelyn couldn't take her eyes off Henry's face, watching his lips grow paler, his breathing shallow. When they reached the emergency entrance, Mark opened the back door without waiting for instructions, shouted for help, and two attendants arrived with a stretcher. Evelyn stepped out with them, holding her husband's hand until they laid him down and wheeled him inside. She stood in the lobby for a moment, heart racing, unsure where to look. Mark came over and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "He's getting care now. Take a breath. I'm not going anywhere." His words felt like something solid to hold on to. Evelyn inhaled deeply and walked to the reception desk, filling out forms she could barely read. Repeating dates and addresses from memory, while the sounds of the hallway drifted in from afar. The next hours passed in a blur. Doctors came and went. Nurses brought updates, and Evelyn sat on a hard chair by the wall, hands clasped as if in prayer. Henry was stable, they said, but would need a few days to recover. Mark appeared with coffee, water, and snacks, tending to her like someone would to a family member. On the second day, Anna arrived with a calm smile and a bag of clean clothes, saying it would help Evelyn feel more comfortable. "We don't know how to thank you," Evelyn murmured. "You don't need to," Anna replied. "You need to rest." Evelyn looked down the corridor where Henry was hospitalized and felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. They had nowhere to go, but for the first time in a long while they weren't alone. In the room, Henry opened his eyes now and then and saw Evelyn in the armchair. He said nothing about the conversation he'd overheard from their children before the escape, holding the secret like something fragile, waiting for the right moment to act. He watched Mark moving in and out naturally, speaking with nurses, asking doctors about his progress. He saw Anna bringing books, fruit, and flowers to brighten the space. Each gesture reminded Henry of the stark contrast they were living: children by blood who had left them behind, and two strangers who treated them as if they had always belonged there. On the fourth day, the doctor said Henry could be discharged, that he needed a stable home and must avoid stress. Evelyn stayed silent, looking at Henry, unsure what to say. Before she could answer, Anna stepped in. "You can come stay at our place until you're back on your feet. It's not big, but we have a spare room." Mark added, "Everything's already set up for you." Henry looked at them with a lump in his throat. He didn't want to be a burden, but knew he had no other choice. Evelyn squeezed his hand, moved. They accepted. When they left the hospital, Mark's car felt different. Clean seats, bags neatly stacked. A faint scent of soap replacing the smell of grease. The Bennett's house was in a modest neighborhood of single-story homes with small yards. Its walls were painted in soft colors, and a garden of herbs Anna grew for cooking filled the front yard. The room prepared for them had clean sheets, a window letting in the morning sun, and a wardrobe with space for their clothes. Evelyn paused in the doorway, fighting tears at such care. Henry sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in months, they didn't have to fear orders, criticism, or hard stares. They could simply exist. Anna brought hot tea and a plate of homemade bread. Mark helped Henry lie down and placed his medicine on the nightstand. In the days that followed, their routine completely changed. Evelyn woke early to help Anna in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, washing fruit, preparing simple meals everyone shared together. Henry spent time in the small garden, talking with Mark about plants and helping where he could. They felt part of something again. Anna and Mark called them Mom and Dad, naturally. And sometimes Anna brought her young nephews to play in the yard, running between the herbs as if it were a secret park. In this atmosphere of renewal, Henry, following Anna's advice, called the bank to update his address and stop relying on his children for mail. He sat at the kitchen table, took a deep breath, and dialed. Evelyn stood beside him, smoothing her apron, nervous. On the other end, a man's voice answered with professional courtesy. Henry explained he needed to update his address so all correspondence would come directly to him. The manager asked routine questions and then, in a tone that shifted the conversation, said, "Mr. Whitaker, while I have you on the line, we haven't received a response to the letters about the inheritance opened in your name. Did you get our notices?" Henry frowned, exchanging a quick glance with Evelyn. "Inheritance? What inheritance?" he asked softly. The manager explained there had been an estate settled months earlier and with no response. The bank had been holding the funds. In administration, the room seemed to shrink as the man on the other end detailed the figures. Henry wrote them down, his hand shaking. Properties, investments, funds. Nearly $15 million accumulated from the death of a great uncle he had barely known. The manager confirmed the letters had been sent to the old address, but said no one had come to the bank. He asked if anyone had authorization to intercept them. Swallowing hard, Henry simply said no. Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling his body tense. "Can't we come in person tomorrow to sort everything out?" Henry asked. "That's the best course," the manager replied. "Bring IDs, proof of address, and signatures so we can transfer the account and release full information." Henry hung up slowly, the receiver slipping from his hand back onto the hook. Evelyn sat across from him, eyes wide. $15 million. "Henry, is that really true?" He nodded, still trying to believe it himself. Anna stopped in the doorway with a tray in her hands, sensing the heavy mood but not asking anything. Henry took a deep breath, straightened his back, and looked at Evelyn with a spark of resolve. "Tomorrow we're going to the bank. We'll handle this with our own eyes." Evelyn gripped his hand, feeling a rush of surprise, anger, relief, and a thin thread of hope she hadn't felt in years. Anna set the tray on the table and sat with them, not yet knowing what was happening but offering the quiet care that had already become second nature in that home. Mark's car glided through the still damp morning streets, its tires whispering over the cold asphalt, while Henry watched closed shop windows and the first hurried passers-by through the glass. Evelyn sat in the back seat, holding on her lap the folder of documents Anna had helped her organize the night before. No one spoke on the drive, only steady looks and a tense quiet mixing anticipation with fatigue. From the passenger seat, Anna turned now and then to offer a gentle smile, trying to reassure them. The scent of the rushed coffee they'd shared still lingered in the car, blending with the faint soap aroma that had replaced the grease smell from their first encounter. Henry felt every mile was taking them farther from the fragility they'd been pushed into and closer to something that might restore their autonomy. Evelyn kept her hands clasped over the envelope, fingers intertwined like she was holding a talisman. Mark parked in front of the bank, an old building with a stone facade, and opened the door so they could step out. "We'll handle everything calmly," he said. Offering his arm to Henry, they climbed the steps slowly, feeling the marbles chill through their shoes, and walked into a hall filled with natural light filtering through tall windows. They were welcomed into a private room upstairs, where heavy curtains muffled the noise from outside and a broad table waited with stacks of documents. The manager, the same man Henry had spoken to the day before, stood to greet them warmly and motioned to the chairs. He didn't repeat the inheritance story in detail, just handed Henry folders with updated reports, provisional cards, and sealed envelopes. "Everything is as we explained yesterday, Mr. Whitaker. We only need the signatures to finalize the ownership and address changes," he said. Henry nodded slightly and began signing, passing each page to Evelyn, who glanced at the headers before initialing. The room smelled of new paper and fresh ink, and every gesture felt like an act of taking back what was theirs. The manager explained only the essentials: direct transfers, a scheduled meeting with a financial advisor to plan investments. Henry breathed deeply at each signature, remembering the road that had brought him here. Evelyn sat upright, her eyes steady, sensing something inside her straighten as well. When they finished, they gathered the organized documents into a folder and rose calmly. Stepping out of the bank, the cold air hit their faces like a confirmation that something had been set right. Mark opened the car door and helped Henry in. Anna automatically adjusted Evelyn's seatbelt, the gesture of someone caring for family. On the way back, Henry kept his eyes on the horizon, but now there was a different light in them. In the back seat, he held the folder to his chest with an almost youthful firmness. Evelyn took deep breaths, feeling for the first time in months that they were no longer at the mercy of others' decisions. Sensing the change, Mark commented only, The next step is to talk to the lawyer. Anna added that she had already scheduled an appointment for that afternoon with a trusted professional who specialized in their type of case. Henry looked at Evelyn and finally told her what he had overheard in the pantry weeks earlier: their children planning guardianship, the sale of their property, and total removal. His voice came out low but firm. Evelyn raised her hand to her mouth, stunned, but didn't cry. She simply placed her other hand over Henry's, squeezing hard. The lawyer's office was in a modest building downtown, with a discreet sign and a waiting room smelling of brewed coffee. They were welcomed without excessive formality and sat at a simple desk where stacks of cases were lined up in boxes. The lawyer listened attentively, asking few questions while Henry recounted the events and handed over the documents. Evelyn stayed by his side, sometimes adding details, other times just looking at the papers. Mark and Anna sat slightly behind, silent but ready to support them. In less than an hour, the attorney laid out a plan: officially transfer all addresses to the Bennett's house, draft a will with firm clauses, block any attempt at guardianship or asset movement without express authorization from the owners. Every signature in that office carried real weight, like laying bricks to rebuild a wall that had been torn down. Henry signed slowly, reading each line, while Evelyn took deep breaths at every stamp. When they finished, the lawyer shook their hands and said, "Now you're protected." The weeks that followed completely changed their routine. Henry recovered physically under medical supervision, while Evelyn rediscovered the joy of cooking for people who truly appreciated her effort. Anna shared the tasks with her: washing fruit, chopping vegetables, preparing simple dishes they all ate together on the porch. Mark showed Henry the small herb garden in the back and listened to old stories while planting new seedlings. Sometimes Anna's young nephews came to play in the yard, running between the herbs as if it were a secret park. The lawyer stayed in regular contact, sending updates by email and phone to ensure no loophole could be used by the children. Henry felt like he owned his name again. Evelyn began smiling lightly, humming to herself as she washed dishes. At night, they all sat together for tea, talking about plans for the future. It wasn't luxury, but it was a home. And above all, it was respect. Henry didn't wait for the children to find out through others. The following week, with accounts settled and the will ready, he called each of them personally. His voice was calm but firm. He told them he and Evelyn were no longer in the home, that they were well, and that they knew about the inheritance. He said he wanted to speak face to face, that they were at the Bennett's house, and that it was important for everyone to come. None of them asked questions. They simply confirmed they would. Mark and Anna prepared the yard with a large table, chairs, and hot tea. The lawyer brought the documents for final signatures and stayed to keep order. The smell of homemade bread baking that morning mixed with the aroma of the garden herbs, a contrast to the meeting that was about to take place. Evelyn sat beside Henry, hands clasped in her lap, waiting for their children to arrive. They came in the late afternoon, and the yard became the stage for a final reckoning. Richard stepped out of the car, adjusting his coat, Melissa with a folder in hand, Chloe on her phone, David with his eyes down. They arrived with rehearsed hugs and words of concern, trying to look like attentive children. Henry stood slowly, resting his hands on the table, then spoke without raising his voice. He told them he had heard their conversation on the morning before the home, that he knew every plan for guardianship and asset sales, that he no longer recognized in them the children he had raised with so much love. He said he and Evelyn had been humiliated in their own house, and that he would not allow them to profit from what they had built. Then he pulled 4 white envelopes from the folder and handed one to each child. "This is what you're entitled to, 1 symbolic dollar and a letter registered in the will." There were protests, angry looks, and broken phrases cut short by the lawyer, who closed the meeting by collecting signatures. Mark and Anna stepped closer, placing their hands on the couple's shoulders. The children kept playing in the yard, oblivious to the tension. With part of the funds already released, Henry and Evelyn helped expand the house to welcome other abandoned seniors, turning that simple space into a place of care. Surrounded by gratitude and a new family, they spent their remaining years there with dignity, knowing the true inheritance wasn't the money, but the decision to stand up together and not let themselves be diminished by their own children's betrayal. The end. So, what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying stories like this one. See you next time.